Welcome to a new episode of Hannya's Advocate. For anyone new to the channel, this is a series where we discuss unpopular or divisive opinions regarding the Yakuza franchise. Seeing as how in the last episode we tackled one of the most debated on Yakuza plot twists to date, I thought it would be fitting to follow it up with a similar topic today. If the spoiler tag at the beginning didn't ruin the reveal already, today's topic of discussion will be the mysterious assassin known only as Mirrorface. It's arguably the most unexpected plot twist of the series to date, yet it somehow still manages to stay on brand for the unique tone that Yakuza 7 is generally known for. Having said that, this will be a rather troublesome plot twist to discuss, cause while the previous topics we've covered in this series had valid arguments being presented from both sides of the proverbial debate, Mirrorface is perhaps the only plot twist in Yakuza that is almost universally disregarded for one reason or another. There were even certain fans that have stated how it ruined the story of Yakuza 7 for them as a whole, which, even as a huge fan of that game myself, I can still kind of see where they're coming from. However, the point of this series has always been to give a sincere, analytical look on a problem, no matter how bizarre it may be, so humor me, just this once. Let's have some fun as we struggle to rationalize the concept behind Mirrorface. The idea behind Mirrorface is relatively simple. He's an incredibly skilled assassin with a number of unique talents. He's been known to alter crime scenes to the point where the police can hardly distinguish accidental deaths from deliberate ones. Though the most notorious skill that this person has would undoubtedly be his ability of emulating a person's entire being. This wouldn't be that much of an issue if he was simply a classic master of disguise that focuses on emulating an individual's wardrobe, but Mirrorface is framed to actually possess the ability of emulating one's physical appearance, voice, and even their natural strength. He's been shown to do this on two separate occasions. Once while posing as Adachi, which ended in a boss fight against him and Ishioda, and the second time, where he helped out Ichiban in the aftermath of the fight against Tendo by posing as Tendo himself. Intriguingly enough, we even managed to get a glimpse of what Mirrorface actually looks like as well. Though at that point, he was going the full Taichi Suzuki route, making distinct facial features fairly hard to make out. Now, much like with many other Yakuza plot twists, the initial use of Mirrorface isn't really the biggest point of contention, at least when compared to the use of this particular twist in the finale. In the fight with Ishioda, the assassin's appearance is played off to a rather comedic effect. Ichiban figured out who the fake Adachi was fairly quickly, and this led to yet another cool example of fighting a fellow party member, similarly to what we had with Namba and Hanjungi earlier on. But again, the bigger issue seems to be Mirrorface's inclusion after the Tendo fight, as it's painted to be the main reason why our heroes could record Aoki Ryo, as he confessed to his involvement in various criminal acts from the main story. So we go from an entertaining subversion of expectations to a sticking point for people who really want to discredit the game's story, as we've seen with concepts like rubber bullets, secret Koreans, and even the use of, quote, Sawa-sensei in the past. Still, by nature of its concept alone, Mirrorface is evidently perceived as the least believable one. So, now that we've done an overview of what the twist entails, we can proceed to deconstruct it, one piece at a time. We'll start by going over the elements that should be the easiest to justify, and then work our way up, coupled with a neat little grading system on the side. First, let's talk about appearance. Copying the wardrobe of a given character is definitely the most excusable aspect of Mirrorface's integration, especially when you consider how many Yakuza characters tend to use a single kind of outfit fairly consistently, with the occasional funeral suits being interspliced from game to game. If you are perceptive enough and are savvy in the ways of sewing and procuring specific types of fabric, creating Adachi's cop outfit or Tendo's recognizable suit from scratch shouldn't be too troublesome, provided you're given enough time. In theory, a similar premise could even apply to using makeup in order to look as close to a targeted face as possible. Granted, you'd need to be an incredibly skilled makeup artist to get to the point of being nigh indistinguishable from the original, but when you consider the amount of talent shown in making practical events in horror media, or the skill exhibited in various cosplay communities in general, I'd still give a thumbs up to this aspect of Mirrorface's believability. But then we get to the more bizarre stuff, like the fact that he can suddenly mirror the strength of his targets as well. Now, we've only really seen Mirrorface partake in combat during a single point in the story, so you could argue that he just happens to be as strong as Adachi, or that he perhaps went easy on him during the struggle, but both of these assessments are a bit of a stretch. At the end of the day, this is a professional assassin we're talking about, so even if he adheres to some magical rulebook that states he can't overpower the person he is mirroring, dear God, I can't believe this is a sentence I actually wrote, that simply means that he is not as competent of an assassin as his reputation entails. But even then, there's still another aspect of his physical prowess to consider. Since we are dealing with a game featuring turn-based combat, Mirrorface also happens to use some skills from Adachi's detective class, and to his credit, he doesn't use all that many of said skills in the actual fight. The two skills that he was shown mimicking even have a different namesake to their original iterations, with Head Splitter being an imitation of Helm Splitter, and Breaking Kick being an imitation of Beatdown. If you tend to focus on little details like this in your favorite games, then this is a nice touch to the initial premise. Having said that, whether you chalk up the combat similarities to Ichiban's imagination filling in the blanks, or Mirrorface perhaps being an Adachi fanboy who studied his combat religiously, this is the point where the believability of the concept really starts suffering, even though it made for one hell of a boss fight. The next group of skills to point out would be his ability to mimic one's voice and general mannerisms. With regards to general mannerisms, there is enough literature on body language that will make anyone perceptive enough catch on to how a person tends to communicate with their body, which in Adachi's case mainly consists of gestures with a sense of weight or impact to them, and doing this a whole bunch of times. Now, when it comes to mimicking one's voice without the aid of technology, on the other hand, things can get exceptionally messy. As skilled as you may be at manipulating your vocal cords, there are certain things that your natural voice just wasn't made for. In the case of Mirrorface, he was actually fortunate enough to have only had to impersonate two individuals, both of whom possessed a similar vocal profile. More specifically, a lower range type of voice with varying levels of distortion, or in more general terms, rasp being thrown in. But while you could make an argument for why Aoki was fooled by the portrayal of Tendo, considering the former's shock at finding Ichiban passed out, and how we didn't have the real Tendo awake for the sake of a possible voice comparison, the same courtesy can't really be given to the impersonation of Adachi. The amount of breath control that you would need to possess to consistently do a specific type of voice while actively fighting against someone is a lot. And you can tell both Adachi and Mirrorface are struggling throughout the encounter. Hell, even if you take into account how Ichiban and his crew haven't known Adachi for all that long, to where they'd catch on to the most minute differences in speech, as these two both pretended to be the real Adachi, it still shouldn't take long for the impersonator's performance to slip up considering the encounter. Why am I going so in depth on this aspect when it's obviously the respective seiyuu for Adachi and Tendo actually voicing Mirrorface? Well, I think they could have made the ordeal even the tiniest bit more believable had they switched to a different voice actor once the assassin's cover was blown. Finding someone with a similar vocal profile to the ones that were impersonated wouldn't have been that hard. And it's not like you can make the concept of Mirrorface feel even more out there than it already is. So that could have been a cool addition overall, just like the off-brand Adachi attacks were. Lastly, there's the idea of Mirrorface studying up on traffic law in its entirety to fool people into thinking he was actually a model cop. And speaking as someone whose close friend is currently still studying law, you're not cramming all of that knowledge in that quickly after getting your job. At this point, we might as well say that Mirrorface was an honorary graduate of law school, which, coupled with his other exemplary skills that include being a great assassin, a skilled voice actor, phenomenal cosplayer, someone perceptive enough to emulate another person's mannerisms, And also having the knowledge on how to manipulate evidence at a crime scene, well, let's just say that if I were a real-life lawyer, I probably would have thrown all of my case papers to the wind if I had to defend this guy, and I'd have cursed the day that I passed the bar exam. Hoshino, you were right to be proud of your exam scores after all. With everything that was mentioned up to now, I doubt anyone would argue that this twist isn't mainly here for the entertainment factor and the suspension of disbelief. Coincidentally, the core of what a plot twist is known to be. Though, when you consider how serious the main narratives in this franchise usually are, it's like we've been conditioned from day one to look at these games in a higher regard as well. The cinematic value, the attention to detail in the voice acting, the naturally evolving character drama, all of these aspects made us hold Yakuza to a generally higher standard than some other games. And once you do that, certain narrative points will stand out a lot more than if they were in a game about catching monkey underpants, for example. Yet, even while taking the pre-established Yakuza blueprint into account, it was evident from the get-go that Yakuza 7 was different than its predecessors. The title, Shin Ryuga Gotoku, that was often used before its official reveal, could have inferred as much on its own. And that difference from the pre-established norm initially led to a very vocal pushback from a portion of the fandom. While it has thankfully subsided once the game hit the West, I'm bringing this up because this really is a game you either adore or despise, based on the fan reaction to it. And if you fall into the category of people who just can't stand Yakuza 7 or what it represents for the series, you'll probably look at something like Mirror Face in a much more critical light than most. The funniest thing about this is how I only really see this twist getting brought up when it's compared to a different infamous plot twist, seemingly to elevate one game's quality by putting another's down. Meanwhile, fans of Yakuza 7 just tend to agree that Mirror Face is ridiculous, and that's all there really is to it. Hell, the implied ridiculousness is part of the charm here, cause the game as a whole is just classic over-the-top Yakuza, with some RPG eccentricities and Ichiban-style embellishments being thrown in. We're talking about a series where characters exude flames while fighting after all, so being unapologetic about the game's contents is part of its identity, and what makes it so fun. This doesn't mean that if you hate Mirror Face that you shouldn't talk about it at all, far from that. As long as both sides of the spectrum are talking it out respectfully, by all means, go all out with it. As for me, my only goal here was to cover a strange little plot twist and have some fun with it. Hopefully, it came off that way as well. Anyway, feel free to share your own thoughts on this particular twist in the comments, or you can perhaps suggest some other topics you'd like to see on the channel as well. Either way, thank you for your time, and I hope you enjoyed this video. So, until next time, take care of yourselves, and have a great day. Cheers!